The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
You said earlier you couldn't identify a reason the house was targeted. Do you have a motive?
We don't.
And I would add that going through this whole investigation, I'd probably say it's easier than it was for Bill's offices. We were focused on a task. We had a task to do, and it was discovering evidence and interviewing folks and that sort of thing. So the motive necessarily doesn't play a part in that, right? Obviously it can, but we were just focused on getting the job done in the correct way as best we could.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott along with Ted Rollins. What my privilege to be with him, joining us live from Boise, Idaho. Just 24 hours ago, after a judge sentenced confessed killer Bryan Kohberger to 4 consecutive life sentences, we're learning many new details about this very gruesome mass murder. The Moscow, Idaho Police Department released around 300 documents, hundreds of pages related to the investigation. These documents are offering a window into what the agency learned about those brutal killings back in 2022. Really thousands of pages. But Court TV's been combing through the documents, and we want to bring you that key information as we uncover it. The next set of documents focus on Dylan Mortensen. It was one of the surviving roommates at 1122 Kings Road. And she was interviewed later in the day that happened about what happened. Here's what we know from that. Dylan was asked if any of her roommates shared any weird experiences in the last couple weeks or calls or texts. Dylan said, no, it's been all normal, nothing weird at all. Nothing really weird happens in Moscow usually, only to find her roommates stabbed to death at their off-campus home just weeks later. This is something else. I want to bring in our guest. We have criminal defense attorney Joanna Nuevas. Thank you so much for being with us, Joanna. We also have Phil Harvey still with us from last hour, and we're talking about different pieces of this very long set of documents. But hearing this, Joanna, let me ask you, because I think that it really highlighted to me, especially not in Moscow. This was a community that was thought of as safe, a safe university, a safe home, and yet the unthinkable happened to these victims.
Absolutely, Judge Ashley. This is a situation where you have this sense of security and safety. You hang out with your friends, you go to and from school, you're living your life day to day. Everything seems normal. And then this all comes as a shock, and an undeniable one that she'll obviously never forget as one of the two survivors of this incident.
Yeah, Dylan was so brave. She came out to the sentencing hearing yesterday and addressed Kohberger face-to-face and addressed the court in person. Bethany Funk had a statement read on her behalf by a friend, but these two had their worlds just turned upside down, Phil, because of the speculation that probable cause affidavit was just long enough to provide enough detail to the general public about the fact that there were 2 surviving roommates, and they didn't call 911 till 11:55 the next day, and that opened the floodgates of criticism. Why? Whoa. And we're now getting the backstory. We're getting more information about what those 2 young women went through. This, for them, they are living now for the rest of their lives with survivor's guilt and trauma that is just not going to go away.
There's no doubt absolutely. And you see this happen. Sorry. I was just going to say, you see that happen on a day-to-day basis with.
Here, that's okay. Joanna, you go real quick, and then let's hear from Phil, please.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, you see that these things happen with like just moms on a daily basis. You might forget your keys in the fridge, and you do things that are out of the ordinary because your brain is scattered with so many things going on. And these two women just experienced one of the most traumatic things that they'll ever happen to them in their lives, and they're frozen in shock. And no, they may not have done what everybody thought they should have did in that moment, but it's completely understandable. The panic had them frozen.
Yeah.
Additionally, you know, that initial probable cause statement doesn't give us the full picture. And of course, now we see that the full picture is hundreds of pages long, 314 supplements, and the survivor's guilt, the perhaps irrational reactions initially, all that gets amplified because on a case like this, there's immediately so much attention and speculation. You really do feel for these two survivors because you're right, their lives have been turned upside down. They will never be the same person after all of this. And it is, again, just remarkable, though initially she said nothing weird had happened. That was their question to her. But as the Moscow Police Department continued investigating, they did start to hear some recollections. There was that man standing in the back, behind the house, looking into the backyard. We did come home to find the door off the hinges. So we don't know how much of that was Bryan Kohberger and how long he had staked this out. I still don't think we have a motive from what we found thus far, other than some of the stuff we talked about in the last hour, that he wanted to try to commit the perfect crime. But there just was a huge investigation here, and there was a lot to piece together.
Yeah, let's read more from Dylan in her report. And this is what you were just saying. Dylan first told police about seeing someone in the house when they responded to the crime scene. Later in the day, she had a longer conversation with police about what she actually saw. When asked again about the series of events, Dylan said she opened the door, meaning her door, when she cried out to Kaylee, then closed the door because she was scared. Dylan said she then opened the door again and heard who she thought was Kaylee, but it could have been Xana, crying in what she thought was the bathroom. Dylan said she then heard a man's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan said it was weird because the statement was not in a nice way, and the voice was one that she had never heard before. Joanne, we had a version of that in the probable cause affidavit, that she was hearing this voice, and now that we know the full picture, you know, some of the details were probably inaccurate in her mind, but I mean, what this experience, and again, a lot of people, when they hear this, they'll be like, well, why didn't she call police, or why? And we heard from her in other documents, they were drinking that night. It was a football Saturday. She was basically, between her and Bethany, they didn't know what was real and what wasn't, and what if they were just hearing different noises from friends who were in this party house. It's a heartbreaking all of the way around when you listen to Dylan and what she went through and these interactions she had with investigators.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get to sit back and dissect what's going on and read through the documents and try to formulate opinions about what people were thinking at the time, but none of us were really living through that moment. And when we have somebody who, you know, you're living in a house with 6 different people, multiple floors, you're hearing noises, you're not sure what's going on. I mean, you have these roommate situations where we don't want to get involved in anybody else's business. We don't want to up and call the police and blow things out of proportion, and maybe it wasn't as, you know, as we thought it might be. I think, you know, obviously when she indicated that she saw like a masked intruder, that's the thing that flags for people. You know, you know that somebody is there. Why aren't you calling the police in that very moment? And I think it's really about survival instincts. You know, are you going to stand there? Are you going to freeze? Are you going to fight? Are you going to flight? And they were just trying to process what is happening around them. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, it's hard to comment on something that's probably going to haunt them for a really long time.
And I just think they may not believe that it's true, that it was really happening. You're in your home. Who's going to think, oh, there's a man in here killing my roommates? I don't think anyone's going to think that. But I want to pick up and read more because, again, Dylan is the only person at 1122 who saw Bryan Kohberger and lived to tell about it. So let's pick up with what she said. First of all, Dylan said she called out to Kaylee again, and there was no crying after, and she did not know what happened after that. Dylan said she opened the door again, and the guy is right there. Dylan described the male as approximately her height, 5 foot 10 inches or a few inches taller, but skinny, not skinny, but athletic build. Dylan said the suspect was wearing all black with masks that covered just his forehead and goes around his face. Dylan showed with her hands the mask exposed his nose, but covered the mouth area. Okay, Phil, weigh in on this, but I just have to tell you, one of the other things we know earlier today, Ted and Kelly Craft reported in reading some of this, that in fact there was an employee at Walmart, and that employee at Walmart said to law enforcement, hey, a couple of weeks ago there was somebody who came in and asked about buying a ski mask here, and I told them, you know, that we don't sell those, but she couldn't really remember a lot of the details.
Yeah, it's such a frightening just narrative of events, and your heart goes out to Dylan because you know, Ted, you mentioned survivor's guilt. I mean, where does she go from here, having knowing that she saw the killer, knowing that she survived, wondering why she didn't also expire at his hands that night, and then also being questioned on how she conducted herself after that. It's so difficult. Nobody should have to go through it. There is no right or wrong in how you respond in these situations. It is just traumatic. And if, you know, there had been a lot of drinking building up to this, she may not have been in a state of mind that she was able to properly respond. These may be very hazy recollections. That's pure speculation on my part. I don't know that we can draw that conclusion. Maybe we can. Again, there are 314 supplements here, but it is just nothing anybody should have to experience.
Well said. Absolutely. All right, I think we're going to hit a break, right? And then we'll come back with more of Dylan Mortensen and more of the documents that were released after the gag order was lifted. We're going through them. We've learned a lot more details of the investigation itself after the murders of the 4 Idaho University students. Stay with us as Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
The Court TV podcast will return.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human. A body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil. He tried to take everything from me. My friends, my safety, my identity, my future. He took their lives, but I will continue trying to be like them, to make them proud. Living is how I honor them. Speaking today is to help me find some sort of justice for them. He may have taken so much from me, but he will never get to take my voice.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rollins, along with Judge Ashley Wilcott, Joanne Nieves, and Phil Harvey. Also along with us, we're reading the documents that have just been released yesterday evening after the sentencing hearing in the courthouse behind me here in Ada County, Idaho. And you just heard Dylan Mortensen. That was yesterday. She had the courage to come to this hearing with the world watching and the man that invaded her home and killed her friends and walked right by her. She confronted him and explained in heartbreaking detail of what his murderous rampage has done to not only her, but all of the friends of the 4 slain students. And part of the documents that have been released are shedding more light on what Dylan said in those moments after, or days after this happened, during police interviews. This is from a Moscow police report talking about an interview they had with Dylan, and she's talking specifically about the man that she saw leaving the house on Kings Road, 1122. Dylan said she believed the suspect was white, but did not remember eyebrow color or what his eyes looked like. Dylan said when she saw the suspect, he saw her and just left. Dylan said she believed he was holding something near his stomach or belt line. Dylan used both hands to point straight out from her abdomen, then moved her hands apart and back together to simulate a bulge. Dylan said this area was black in color, and she thought that now maybe it was a gun. Dylan said the unknown object had an arrow shape to it. Dylan really was unsure, and she said she was tired during the event. Phil Harvey, he likely did have a gun. If you think of, if he's planned this out the way we know he has, is it safe to say he likely did have more than just his K-bar knife, and likely had a gun just in case he needed it?
We certainly can't rule it out. It's one of those details that I think tells us that Dylan Mortensen was afraid in that moment, because she's giving a statement. Now, maybe some of this is her interpreting what she saw in hindsight. It's very difficult to determine the reliability of eyewitness testimony in general, because it's a stressful event and memory is a fickle thing. So she didn't say she saw a gun. She said she saw a bulge near his waistband. He may have been carrying a firearm for his personal protection in terms of his escape plans, because he apparently didn't intend to use it in the crime. But it certainly says a lot about what Dylan Mortensen went through and how she, at least how she's interpreting the events after the fact.
And Dylan admits that they were drunk. They'd been out celebrating. There's a big football game that day. There'd been a party at the house. They went to a college football game, doing what kids do in college, out having fun. She admits that they were drunk. Let's pick it up there, because Dylan Mortensen did help the Moscow police come up with a description, a timeline rather, of how long Bryan Kohberger was in the house before she did see him leaving. She was asked how long she believed it was from the time Kaylee said, "Someone is here," to when she, Dylan, saw the suspect. Dylan said she thought it was about 10 or 20 minutes. Dylan went on to say she was in and out of it, and she did not fully remember the incident. Dylan was asked where the suspect was at in the residence when she saw him. Dylan said the suspect was between her bedroom door and the kitchen. Dylan said she remembered watching the suspect go out the kitchen door and leave. Dylan said at this time she closed her door and locked it up as fast as she could. Dylan said the suspect did not walk toward her or say anything. Joanna, first of all, Dylan and a roommate admit that they were scared, that they would think that they heard something and call people to help because they were scared in their house. And then this happens. But part of what stood out to me is, why didn't or wouldn't Bryan Kohberger attack her? Why do you think that he kept going, that he didn't come back? Was it the thrill of catching the other roommates unaware? Why would he just leave and leave an eyewitness there?
You know, it's hard to interpret the mind of somebody that you just completely don't understand their behaviors to begin with. You know, he had we don't know the motive for why he did what he did, so it's hard to explain why he didn't do what he didn't do. It may be that he, I know she thinks that he saw her. Maybe he didn't notice her peeking out of the door. Maybe there wasn't an exact eye contact. He's on a mission. He completed his mission upstairs, and he's on his mission to get out the door. So it may have been something that just escaped his view. She may have opened the door just very briefly and closed it again. Or, there is the possibility that, he had an idea of what the schematics were in the house and who was in there, and had decided that this is part of his overall stroke in terms of this plan. I'm going to kill these people, and I'm going to let the remaining 2 survive to live with the memory of what happened. So he gets his the thrill from not only committing the murder, but also leaving these people to live with the agony of it. When you see him in the sentencing, it doesn't even seem as he's impacted by the statements that are being made. And so there's so many things that we could speculate on, but it's a wide variety of strange musings that might be going on in his head.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, do you think we'll ever hear this story from Bryan Kohberger? He decided not to allocute yesterday in court, but will he tell his story in his version, at least, on his terms? Do you think at some point, because he is a narcissistic wannabe? He could still pursue post-conviction relief. That's something to keep in mind. He has waived his right to an appeal. If he has any buyer's remorse for accepting this negotiated plea within the time allotted in Idaho, then he could allege that his defense counsel was ineffective, or that Judge Hippler was somehow should have been conflicted off the case or made egregious errors, and he can try to get the case reopened. If he is considering that, obviously we don't know what's going on in his mind, but if he's considering that, he should remain silent until that process is complete. But looking forward, will we ever know? Will we ever hear his side of the story? I gotta say, I personally, I hope not. I don't think perhaps in some respect in terms of, studying psychological disturbances and neuroses and understanding from a criminological perspective how to identify these sorts of perpetrators. Maybe there could be some benefit from hearing his story, but there is just, there's so much need, I think, for the families to have some closure and to allow the spotlight to move on. Obviously, this is breaking news. We're talking about these documents. The public wants to know about them, and I think there's a value in having the post-event briefing, in a sense, is what we're doing here, and understanding how the investigation was conducted, what the survivors went through. But personally, I don't really want to hear from Bryan Kohberger.
And the judge said that too. The judge said, I want his 15 minutes of fame to be over, and said really to media, I hope no one seeks him out and comes to him to get his story. But Ted, as a narcissist, and you were there, you're inside that courtroom yesterday, I think he will speak. I think if somebody offers him the stage that is big enough for his narcissism, that he will choose at some point to maybe not tell us everything that we'd like to know, but to spin his own version of what he wants to tell people. Ted?
Yeah, and let's be honest. The idea that no one is going to take his phone call or do an interview with him, if I'm completely honest, if Bryan Kohberger said, hey, I want to sit down and tell you exactly what happened, as a journalist, I'm going to I'm absolutely going to interview him. And people are going to say, well, you're a horrible person. That's just the nature of the journalistic, the mindset is you want to hear from everybody in every single scenario. I've interviewed people that have committed horrible, horrible crimes in prison. So the idea that no one's going to give them a forum sorry. If he wants to speak, people will listen, and I get it, and I think it is disgusting. Whatever he says is going to be filled with lies, and it's going to be self-serving. That's part of the equation. But I agree with you, Judge. I think at some point he's not going to like just sitting in a prison cell when he has been the talk of an entire country for so long. Eventually, he's going to try to spin his version of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Or write a book. That's the other thing he might do. But I definitely think, I also think, Joanna, to you, that had he not been caught, absolutely, he would continue. Just a quick answer. I know we need to go to break. He would continue to kill.
I have no doubt about that, Judge Ashley. His aim is to perfect his crimes, and he would have continued.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, we do need to take a break. We are continuing to go through the Kohberger documents and bring you key information as we are learning it. Coming up, what we're learning from the victim's autopsy reports and why investigators say it shows that one victim tried hard to fight back against Kohberger.
I was so frantic that morning and scared to death, not knowing what had happened. And when I made the 911 call, I couldn't even get out the words. That was the worst day of my life. Xana was 1 in a million. She was the life of the party, but she was also the kindest and funniest person I knew. Kaylee had the most beautiful, radiant smile. And she was so kind, but also one of the funniest people I've ever known. I really believed that she could have ruled the world if she wanted to, and she would have been America's sweetheart. Ethan was the sweetest, most genuine guy. He was always smiling and always making other people smile too. Maddie was not only one of my best friends, but she was the older sister I would have always wanted.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human.
We are done being victims. We are taking back our lives.
I'm Ashley Wilcott, along with Ted Rowlands, live in Boise, Idaho, joined by our guests as well, attorneys Joanna Nieves and Phil Harvey. This hour, we're bringing you a look at newly released documents in the Idaho student murders case. Now, these documents there's a lot of pages, but they're shedding light into what really happened to Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Hundreds of documents were released by the Moscow police within hours of Kohberger being sentenced to life in prison. Now, in the next part of this, we want to focus on the autopsies of 2 of the victims. Let's start first with Kaylee Gonsalves, who had 20+ stab wounds. And the document states that she had sharp force injuries, asphyxial injuries, blunt force injuries, and that her fatal injuries included lacerations in her left lung and liver, subdural bleeds, a stab behind her clavicle that cut her subclavian vein and artery. Phil, very hard to hear, but the reality is that is not one stab wound to the heart. That is not a quick get in, get out. That is purposeful, and she's moving, and Bryan Kohberger's going after her, and repeated stab wounds. The number of injuries surprises me a little bit when you hear all 4 were killed by one person in their home, 4 a.m. It happened, so many stab wounds, so many injuries.
It is shocking,
you're right.
Judge Ashley. And the asphyxial injuries do make it appear that he was holding her down by her neck while he proceeded to just brutally stab her repeatedly. Just the number of the wounds and how deep and how brutal they are, it's not something you see. I mean, I have seen stabbing cases, but the reports in this case indicate a level of intentionality and force and a methodical approach that you really don't see very much.
Oh, Ted, it's horrific hearing these details.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And to your point, it It's so many stab wounds. The rage that he had to have had, or something, whatever was fueling him. He doesn't know these people. Like, it's not the ex-boyfriend, it's not the husband or the wife killing the husband. Like a lot of the cases, these are 4 strangers, and he mutilates them. It is horrific. And look at Madison Mogan, her autopsy report. Fatal injuries, lacerations to the left lung and liver. Maddie only had sharp force injuries. The weapon was very sharp. Suspect used a lot of force. Joanna, you said earlier it's hard. You're not going to be able to put yourself in the position of the person that, if you want to call him a person, that did this. But just from a logistical standpoint, able to pull this off, you have to be physically and mentally in a state of where adrenaline's running through your body, and there's got to be a factor of rage or something, because it's just he mutilated 4 individuals in a very short amount of time. It's horrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. Reading this is just as it shines this light and makes it very, very clear that there had to be something more to it. I think that's just what people want to believe, because it's like, how not only are you carrying this out and against 4 people, but stabbing tends to be so personal. Like you were saying, you see this in these dating relationships, or where there's something that happened, and then you have the asphyxiation as well. Like a strangulation is some kind of like more personal type of crime that we typically see. And so those combination, when you see that for Kaylee, but you don't necessarily see the same report for Madison, it almost makes you wonder, was there something that triggered this between him and Kaylee that trickled over into the rest of the home, but was his intention really targeted towards her? Again, we don't know, but those little nuggets or clues that are left behind make you wonder that, yes, they were strangers. They didn't personally know him, but was there some off-the-cuff remark or something that happened in a parking lot or some chance encounter at some point that really made them the target of his fixation?
And, you know, it's interesting. I think the word targeting can be misused or misunderstood, because I know the police in Moscow said no, they were not targeted. But when we're looking through this transcript and see things like one of the roommates reporting she may have seen someone outside of the home, one of the doors hanging by its hinges, at the screen doors at the home, you do have to wonder, to your point, if perhaps he didn't know them, but he had his sights fixed on them. Call that what you may. I want to turn, though, to another part of the documents, because we also see some of the results from Xana Kernodle's autopsy. I can't get over this. It states that she had 50+ stab wounds. Most of hers were defensive wounds. Her fatal injuries included lacerations in her right lung and heart, with only sharp force injuries. To make it even harder, to make it even sadder, Phil, defensive wounds, 50. She fought for her life, literally, and the autopsy proves that.
It does, and I think if you look at the differences that you see in the autopsy reports for these individuals, I believe it was it Morgan's that it was only fatal, it was only sharp force. Kaylee, you have the asphyxiation, and then with Xana, you do have the defensive wounds. So it suggests, it certainly would be consistent with an unfolding of events where Morgan is kept caught completely off guard. Kaylee becomes aware of what's happening maybe right before it does, and he has to hold her down. And by the time he comes to Xana, she is aware of what's happening in the house and trying to do something or defend herself. So just a horrific picture of events, and I think that is borne out in the police reports and the observations of the first responders when they arrive.
Yeah, and we do know that Xana had received a DoorDash delivery in the minutes before, within 15, 20 minutes before the murders. And according to her phone activity, she was on watching TikTok videos, so she was awake. So she must have heard something up from the third floor and then engaged with the suspect, but 50-plus wounds is horrific. Now, Ethan, this is the autopsy findings for Ethan Chapin. Fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle. The wound severed his jugular vein, subclavian artery. He only had sharp injuries as well. Was he asleep? Was he... You have to think that if Xana fought back, that maybe he was just waking up, or if he was killed first. We don't know. We don't know, but what we do know is that these four beautiful people were absolutely just butchered in a way that is savage. And again, it comes back to how would you fuel that and we don't know, but you're right, Joanna, there seems to have to be something, unless he's, Mr. Warrior going to fight in his, it's hard to get your head around. And if you think about the family members who, now that these documents have been released, have an opportunity, if they want, they can really go into some horrible rabbit holes in terms of details of how they lost their loved ones.
Ted, can I just jump in here and say, I just think there was an adrenaline of committing the perfect crime. I think in his mind, he was going to commit that perfect crime. He knew exactly what he was going there to do. And I think his adrenaline was so full tilt to do this successfully that just fueled him on. Joanna, I know Ted had asked you. I just had to say that, but Joanna, weigh in, please.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think the family, it would be hard for these people who've been so invested and who have these unanswered questions and, to avoid looking at these documents and trying to figure out something to bring them some level of peace and closure about what happened. And, him not saying anything, obviously he has his rights to keep it to himself, but him not saying anything is just another level of torture towards the family and the survivors. And then as far as, him carrying out that perfect crime, obviously he failed. He left a sheath behind with DNA evidence on it. And, he prides himself on being so smart, and this narcissistic demeanor that we've kind of caught on to, that we've mentioned, may lead to him somewhere down the line doing a book or doing some television expose on why he did it and how he did it. I do believe he'd love to take the stage with that. But at the end of it all, will this give the family any peace? I think that's what we're looking for. Whether it's from him sharing something or these documents, they may want to avoid the gritty details, but I don't think they'll be able to resist. They're going to be looking for some closure.
Right, you want to know everything. You want to know everything, what happened to your little girl or boy at this point, because let's face it, they were young adults, yes, but to their parents, they were their little ones that they watched grow up. It's heartbreaking. Let's get a break. When we come back, more insight into Bryan Kohberger from an inmate at the Ada County Jail who was right next to Kohberger. He reached out to investigators. This is part of the document dump. What he said about Kohberger. It's interesting. Stay with us.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Along with Judge Ashley Wilcott, I'm Ted Rollins. I'm in Ada County, Idaho, where yesterday we witnessed an extraordinary sentencing hearing for Bryan Kohberger. He sat and listened to victim impact statements for hours, and then he decided to say nothing about his involvement. He had the opportunity to address the court and decided not to take advantage of that. Joanne Nuevis and Phil Harvey also along with us. We've been going over the documents that have been unsealed, and part of that, and it's all over the place. It's autopsy reports, it's the interviews with the surviving roommates, with people living in the area. it was Bryan Kohberger himself when they brought him in for questioning. There's a unique one in part of this document dump, and it's basically a report compiled from an inmate at the Ada. This guy was sitting next to Bryan Kohberger in his cell. Kohberger was next door, and he reached out to Moscow PD and said, hey, you want my take on this dude? And they said yes. And so they interviewed him, a guy by the name of investigator Brett Payne. We've been listing a lot of his reports. He talks about what he learned from this inmate. And the inmate, redacted name, this is Payne's words, told me that Kohberger would often question him about his past criminal offenses and why he was in the maximum security wing of the jail. I asked the inmate what he thought of Kohberger's intelligence. The inmate stated that Kohberger was the smartest person he had encountered while in confinement. Phil Harvey, this is a guy that has committed quadruple homicide. He is now in jail. And he's questioning other inmates, hey, why are you in here? It's almost like an extension of his studies at Washington State University, where he had that bizarre questionnaire that he was sending out to criminals, or hoping criminals would respond to. What do you feel? What did you feel when you did it? He's not in there saying, oh my gosh, what have I done? Crying, wailing. There doesn't, just from this one inmate's report to police, it doesn't sound like Kohberger lost any sleep after butchering these 4 young people. Phil.
Ed, I agree. The picture that we see emerge from this note, as well as so many details from this investigation in this case, is it seems that Bryan Kohberger just has a lurid fascination with violence. He enjoyed his crimes, it seems, and he's asking his neighbors in jail and in prison about their crimes. And so it is, it's very disturbing to hear about, and it confirms the worst suspicions about Bryan Kohberger's character and mental stability.
And I want to talk a little bit about more insight into who he was. This is also from the transcript. The inmate told me Kohberger quickly became annoying because of his habits. He told me Kohberger would wash his hands dozens of times each day and would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower. I asked the inmate if Kohberger slept at night. He told me Kohberger would be awake almost all night and would only take a nap during the day. Joanna, to me that sounds a little bit like symptoms of OCD, the hand washing, etc., which isn't necessarily in keeping with the number of times he stabbed the victims and the things we learned from the autopsy reports. Or
Right.
is it? Maybe it is.
You know, when you start thinking about why were there so many stab wounds, right? 20 and 50 stab wounds. Was it symptomatic of his OCD and the other mental health diagnoses that he has? Did it have to be an even number? You know, it's not 21, it's not 52, but 20 and 50 plus. I don't have the exact number in front of me now, but I wonder if it was somewhat compulsive, that it was also that extensive.
That's a good point, Ted. Good point. It might have been.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, it's horrible. The fact that he isn't curled up in a ball in his cell in the Ada County Jail, a guy with no criminal record, and he's more concerned about his hygiene, his habits. I don't know if he broke a sweat, you know, and you look at that selfie that he took after the murders, it makes it even more disgusting. He accomplished what he thought was a goal, but it wasn't. We're learning more on all of this through this document release from Moscow police. And we're going to hit a break here. I want to thank Joanna and Phil for your valuable time. We appreciate it. Judge Ashley Wilcott as well. We're going to step away and get a break here. When we come back, more from Bryan Kohberger and his interview with police after he was apprehended in the state of Pennsylvania. Michael Ayala is going to take over. I'll stick around as well. Stay with us.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. I know there has been concern about him collaborating on books or movies or other media projects, and I truly hope that someone does not stoop to affording him this spotlight that he desires in the name of clicks, royalties, or profits. His actions have made him the worst of the worst. Even in pleading guilty, he is giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption, nothing suggesting even a recognition or understanding, let alone regret for the pain that he has caused.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. Those words came from Judge Stephen Hippler yesterday, just before he sentenced Bryan Kohberger to 4 consecutive life sentences. Now, Kohberger sat and watched emotionless, as he did throughout the proceedings, as the family and friends of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin lashed out at him for the grief, pain, and anguish that they continue to feel. Now, the 4 students were all found stabbed to death inside their off-campus home in November of 2022. Now, Kohberger refused to speak at his sentencing, leaving family members and the community still wondering why. Well, we're now getting a bit more insight into the case. The Moscow Police Department released documents that reveal what they uncovered during the investigation into the murder, and we're going through those for you. We're reading and discovering new information in these documents right alongside you. And Court TV anchor Ted Rowlands joins us live from Boise, Idaho. He, as well, has been digging through these documents and has been guiding us through them throughout the day. All right, Ted, we are hearing from the killer himself now regarding an interview that Bryan Kohberger did.
Yeah, Michael, after they raided the house in Pennsylvania, the detectives from Moscow traveled to Pennsylvania. They brought Kohberger in to police custody, and they sat him down. And this was the one and only time Kohberger would be subjected to an interview. He would refuse all subsequent interviews, apparently, because he did ask for a lawyer at the end of it. But they kept him for a while before he left. And this is a bit of the recitation from it. This is Brett Payne is basically filing a report here talking about what he and Gilbertson did. And he says, Detective Gilbertson and I began by introducing ourselves and stating which agencies we represented. When I stated who I was, Kohberger stated, "You look familiar." Gilbertson and I prepared our note-taking materials, and Gilbertson read Kohberger his Miranda rights. Then Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he understood his rights, and he replied he did. After collecting Kohberger's personal information and inquiring about any medications, Gilbertson and I began to speak to Kohberger. Gilbertson asked Kohberger about the SWAT operation at the house, in which Kohberger replied he was concerned about his parents and his dog. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he was going to Washington State University, to which he replied he was. He made some small talk with Kohberger about sports for some time. Kohberger stated he didn't follow WSU football much, but was a baseball fan. And this began what was a cat and mouse game, Michael. They went back and forth between the 2 investigators and Bryan Kohberger. They eventually bring up the murders, and because Kohberger's asked him, in fact, at one point, Kohberger in this interview says, "I appreciate all of the small talk, but why am I here?" And that's when they said, "Well, we're inquiring about the incident in Moscow, Idaho. Did you hear of it?" He replied that yes, he had heard of it, that he watched the news, and that he had gotten an alert on his telephone after that. And they continued to go back and forth. Kohberger shared some stories about traveling cross-country with his father and how moved he was by the beauty of the country while they traveled. But then when it got down to the nitty-gritty, Kohberger asked him point blank, specifically, "What are you looking for?" And they asked him if, they said basically, "Well, we're hoping you can provide some information about what we're investigating." And at that point, he asked for a lawyer. It continued for a little bit longer. and then he asked for a lawyer again. And by the third time he even started to bring up an attorney, they stopped the interview because, of course, they were entering into territory that they didn't want to lose what they had already accomplished, potentially. But, Michael, it was fascinating that Kohberger played this back and forth game with these two investigators throughout this interview. They never got a chance to confront him. They never got that chance to say, listen, we've got your DNA, we have your phone records, we know you were in the vicinity. And that moment that, you know, every investigator wants, and of course every jury wants, of we got you, buddy, and he says, I did it. No, didn't happen, because he knew exactly when to stop that interview.
You know, it's interesting, Ted, and I'm glad the way you put it really sort of sums it up for me. And I was going to say to you, you've been going through this interview for a little bit now. And when I listen to it, when I read through it, and I hear you talk about it, it seems to me, and I think it's pretty clear, he's having, I would venture to say, he may be having fun going back and forth with the police officers at that point, because he clearly could have asked for an attorney right away, because of his background. He knows that would be the right thing or best thing to do or prudent thing to do. He wants to play this out as long as he can. That's the sense that I get. Did you get that sense?
Yeah, and there was one moment in the interview, back and forth, where he says to them, what do you want to know? And they say, well, what can you tell us? And he comes back and says, well, what do you want to know? And it almost, to your point, I think he's in there gauging it. He's not a nervous wreck. There's no note there that he's sweating profusely or he seemed nervous. He wants to know what they have. Do they have my knife sheath, which I know I left behind? Do they have my DNA? What do they have? And I think he is hoping that they'll give him the clue, and then he can end the interview. But I think they were both fishing, to your point, Michael. It's a back and forth cat and mouse game.
You know, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, as he sits down for this interview, Ted, he has to know that he made that mistake, right? He has to know that he left that sheath behind. So he has to know that perhaps they do have something, but what he doesn't know probably at this point is that they can connect him to it. And I'm not even sure if at this point they were able to do that. I don't know if they did the IgG yet, but were they or were they not able to connect him to it at that point?
Yeah, I believe they had, but you're right. You're absolutely right. He doesn't know everything. He knows he left the sheath behind, and he probably knows that within minutes of leaving when he reaches down. Because you recall, according to the phone records, he comes back early in the morning, about 4 or 5 hours later, and seems to be in the vicinity. And you wonder if he is contemplating going back in there to try to get his sheath that he left behind, knowing that Dylan Mortensen, at least maybe even he knew about Bethany, but he knew there was another roommate there because he walked right by her. You just get the feeling, Michael, that they had him dead to rights. He knew he was dead to rights, but he wanted to know what they knew before he left that interview. Because to your point, he knew he would get out of there as soon as he wanted to and ask for a lawyer. He'd been studying this for a very long time, but he wanted the opportunity to really see what they would spill, and they didn't give him anything. He didn't give them anything either. But
yeah, it was, like you said, a cat and mouse game. I want to read a little bit more now of that Moscow Police Department interview with Bryan Kohberger. Again, this is Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson and Corporal Brett Payne. So Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger what the process was to apply for a PhD. Kohberger stated that he applied 2 places, UC Irvine and WSU. Kohberger said that he was going to graduate with his master's in criminal justice from DeSales and was inspired. Kohberger then asked if it was okay to engage in small talk like we were, to which we replied it was. And again, the we is the police officers. Now, after briefly mentioning that he was strengthened by the fact that his mother and father were okay, Kohberger said that he applied to the 2 aforementioned schools because they didn't require the GRE exam. Kohberger then spoke about the GRE for a brief time and then said he was accepted by WSU. Now, Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger what led him down the road of becoming a professor. Well, Kohberger stated that it was because he loved being in college and stated that knowledge was far more important to him than money. Kohberger added WSU had a good program to study under and then said, "You guys know all about this more than likely." A little bit more from that interview. Kohberger then asked questions about University of Idaho and other Idaho universities before stating that he didn't know much about Idaho or Washington and had not left the tri-state area much. Kohberger then returned to speaking about his focus on learning and how he thought that he could obtain his doctorate degree. Kohberger then said he recently returned home to see his family. All right, Ted, so what do you take away from that? I mean, when I'm reading that, what jumps out at me right away is the idea that he had this sense that information, learning was very important to him. It was an area and a space I think he felt comfortable in. Again, we kind of found out that he was on the spectrum a little bit, and I think it's an area that they do well in, the reading, the learning, but also that could have informed the way he went about his crime.
Yeah, and his affect, I think, that we've seen in court likely was the same in that interview because there was no notation, again, of anything that they observed in terms of his shifting or nervousness. So I think he was playing this game, this cat and mouse, and he was more than willing to opine about his life and where he had come from, and they let him. They let him sort of take control at the beginning of this because they wanted him to feel comfortable. And you could see that bear out as this interview continues. Now, eventually, Kohberger pulls the plug when it gets down to the specifics. But at this point, it's let him talk, and boy, was he more than willing to opine about his wonderful life.
And it's interesting because I think part of the tactics of the police would be to keep him talking, right? You want to establish a rapport, and as long as they're talking, they could give you information that could be helpful or hurt them down the road, meaning the defendant himself, Bryan Kohberger. But he was the one. Did you notice? He was the one. They said he asked if it was okay if he could talk about these other things. And again, I think that feeds into this idea that this was something he was enjoying, and he was going to milk this thing as much as he could.
Yeah, I agree. And also he could kind of flex on his low-key, I'm better than you thing. Like, knowledge is more important to me than money. Like, all right, big boy or Mr. Smarty Pants. And I was moved when I traveled across the country. I'm not a religious guy. I was raised Christian, but I'm not that religious. But boy, when nature exposes itself, it moves me. All of this sort of pious, just dissertation that he's giving to these inspectors, these detectives, and everybody knows, okay, we're dancing around the elephant in the room, and that is that you killed 4 people, and we know it, and you know it too. And it was that never came to a head because he killed it before. He got in what he wanted to say, he waited to see what they would tell him, and then he was out.
And he shut it down. He shut it down right when he was supposed to. Again, showing that knowledge of what was going on. All right. Ted, stand by. We're going to take a break here. Now, when we come back, we'll have more of Bryan Kohberger's interview with the police. Fascinating stuff. So keep it here on Court TV, the front row seat of justice.
The Court TV podcast will return.
You're nothing. May you continue to live your life in misery. You are officially the property of the state of Idaho, where your fellow inmates are anxiously awaiting your arrival. But it's okay, because they're there to help you. Hell will be waiting. Quick message from our youngest daughter. Aubrey wanted to say, you may have received A's in high school and college, but you're going to be getting big D's in prison.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. We've been bringing you information that we've learned from documents newly released by the Moscow Police Department of its investigation into the Idaho student murders case. Now, right now, I want to read more of Kohberger's interview with Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson and Corporal Brett Payne. Again, they picked him up, they were talking to him, and here's another part of that interview. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger about his time at DeSales University. Now, Kohberger spoke for some time about his time at Northampton Community College and DeSales. Kohberger then spoke about how he became interested in criminal justice and stated that he thought about being a police officer, but didn't want to make that commitment unless he was absolutely sure. Kohberger then continued to speak about his education and universities. Kohberger also spoke more about the process to get into a PhD program and how competitive it can be. All right, let me bring in our guest for this hour. Joining us to discuss, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaffer and Criminal Defense Attorney, former Assistant District Attorney Marie Pedetta. Hey guys, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. And Marie, I'll start with you. I just want to get your general thoughts. We've been covering this interview and just the information that's been delivered all day, just fascinating stuff. But I find this interview particularly interesting because, again, it gives us insights into who he is. You really don't get any of that just from watching him because he has no affect at all in the courtroom or really any time we've seen him, some when he talks to his parents or some of his family members, but that's about it. What do you make of some of this interview that we've been sharing with our viewers?
I think Bryan Kohberger is full of himself. And even during that interview, he knows exactly what he did. And he knew that it was over for him. But he still felt the need to try to get somebody to believe that he was super smart. He was this, he was that, a pending master's degree, almost like he was showing off himself, which made no sense because at the end of the day, Michael, that man targeted that house with those people in it because they were everything he couldn't be. He was a cornball. That's who he was. Socially awkward, probably couldn't get a date, and he couldn't get next to that clique of people. And that's why he probably chose them, targeted them. They were beautiful, smart. And they had personality. Look at him. That's why he targeted those people. He was hating on them because they were everything he could never, ever be in his life. And one of the victims' families pointed it out. You're a loser. You're a nobody. And that's what was going on there.
Yeah, fair enough. I can't disagree with you. And, you know, it's interesting, Michael, because I thought one of the comments, Kaylee Gonzalez's sister, you know, she had the insight in her comments to talk about the fact that, you know what, you think you're so smart, but you're not. And I think that whole line where she went down that was the one thing, the one way I think you could really get to a guy, as we're learning more about Kohberger through these documents, how you could really get to him.
Yeah, there's a precedent for this type of person, this type of sociopathy. I watched a documentary a few years ago about the BTK killer. That person actually was a police officer. And the documentary broke down the psychology of a person just like the BTK killer, which I see a lot of parallels with Kohberger. And they surreptitiously recorded him before the interview, after the interview, before they caught him, after they caught him. And what they found was that people like the BTK killer and people like Kohberger want to be found, and they love the attention. And for them, it's a gross, grotesque, morbid type of art form for them because of their mental health issues. And so the BTK killer, when he was uncovered, he actually enjoyed talking to investigators about how he did it, how he covered his tracks, what he did to cover his tracks. And then he even told the interviewer after he confessed everything, I feel great. This feels really good. And then later on, when all the attention went away, he was interviewed again. He said, I made a mistake. I'm depressed. Nobody's giving me attention anymore. This was the BTK killer. And I'm seeing the same thing in these interviews with Bryan Kohberger. I think that's the mental health issues right there, right like on par with one another.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And it's interesting because I think that partly can explain why he went back the next morning, again, to get that high again, to see what was going on, people paying attention to his work, how that was going. I want to read a little bit more from that interview that he did. Again, this is Detective Gilbertson. So he says, then Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger about his move to Washington. Kohberger said that he drove across country and wanted the challenge of driving cross country and experiencing it with his father. Kohberger then said that he took a different route back home with his father for Christmas break to avoid snow. Kohberger spoke about his travels and the risks of such travels in winter. And Marie, again, I think what we're seeing here, and it's interesting because, again, the police officers want to keep him talking, but he seems very happy to continue talking. He asked them if it's okay if he keeps talking. And this goes back to something that the judge said at sentencing. He says he hopes no one goes and tries to, give him an opportunity to tell his story, make money off his story. This is an interesting issue here because, again, he seems to like to talk. He may want to tell his story. He may want to explain why he did what he did. He may want to explain why he may make it seem like he allowed them to catch him because, again, he's so clued into this idea that he's the most intelligent guy or smartest guy in the room. So the question is, do you think someone might try to talk to him? I think that's a clear yes, but will he want to talk to them?
I think he absolutely will want to talk to them because he's going to still want to try to be relevant. He realizes that what happened. He was not a smart criminal. He got caught. And I don't think he intended to get caught. He might have done it, and he might have probably done it again if he didn't get caught. But believe, he did not think they were going to catch him. He was going to leave that DNA behind, etc. So, yeah, he's going to be in prison. He's probably going to be alienated because nobody's going to embrace him in prison. Like one of the victims' families said, he's going to face a lot in jail. And he's going to face not getting A's. He's going to get something else, another alphabet. And that was well said. He's going to want to talk because that's the only time he's going to be relevant in this life. If somebody comes in and says, let's give you an interview, he's going to be here for it. Of course he is.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Mike, because I think that's the thing that probably scares him the most. The sense that I get is that the irrelevancy is going to be the problem for him, because one could say it was the irrelevancy or his inability to sort of break into the sort of this mainstream lifestyle that might have led him to this crime.
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The avatar of a Bryan Kohberger is well known to criminal justice. It's well known. This is not a surprise to anybody the way he is, and he is going to face a lot of. He's going to wish that he had the death penalty. And honestly, the state of Idaho, and I'm going to be pilloried online for saying this, the state of Idaho did the family a favor by doing this plea without consulting them, because look, I can go on and on and on from my personal experience and my family and my older brother and all of that, and why, sometimes the government has to step in and make a decision that families don't accept. But at the end of the day, this Bryan Kohberger is a menace. A trial would have given him the platform he wanted. He wanted a platform. And let's look at the facts, right? Since 1976, only 3 people have been executed in the state of Idaho. The last one was 13 years ago. And there's only 8 people on death row in Idaho, and the appeals process is decades and decades and decades in Idaho. So it's not exactly like a trial would have been better for the family, would have been better for Bryan Kohberger. So at the end of the day, my money's on the fact that maybe Bryan Kohberger might identify as another gender after 5 years in prison and say, I can't handle this, because he's going to be very, very, very badly treated in prison.
Yeah, and even if they went to trial, I'm not sure the families would have gotten the answer that they wanted at trial. At least that's the sense I'm getting. All right, Michael, Marie, stand by. Folks, please stay with us as well. We're going to have more of Bryan Kohberger's interview with the police when we come back, so keep it here on your front row seat to justice.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human. A body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil. He tried to take everything from me. My friends, my safety, my identity, my future. He took their lives, but I will continue trying to be like them, to make them proud. Living is how I honor them. Speaking today is to help me find some sort of justice for them. He may have taken so much from me, but he will never get to take my voice.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. We are continuing to bring you more of Bryan Kohberger's interview with police during the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Xana Coronado were found brutally stabbed to death inside their off-campus home in November of 2022. Now, yesterday, a judge sentenced Kohberger to 4 consecutive life sentences after Kohberger accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Right now, I do want to read you more of Kohberger's interview with police, beginning with this. Kohberger then began to speak about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. We spoke about this for some time, and Kohberger said that he was raised Christian, but was always a skeptic, except when he was confronted with the beauty of the natural world. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he had ever been to the Pacific Northwest prior to coming to WSU, and Kohberger said that he had not. Now, he asked Kohberger, he says, I asked Kohberger if he and his father made any stops along their way back to Pennsylvania. He told me they visited Colorado, but the main goal was just drive. Kohberger then told the story about seeing an unmarked police car near Kansas City speed up behind him, catch up to another vehicle, turn on its emergency lights, then drive away. Kohberger thought this was strange and was unsure why it occurred. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about the job he mentioned. Kohberger stated that he was a teaching assistant. Kohberger then talked about how busy he was and how the funding package that comes along with being a teaching assistant is what makes the extra work worth it. All right, let's bring back in National Trial Attorney Michael Jaffer and Criminal Defense Attorney, former Assistant District Attorney Marie Pereira. Mike, what do you make of that part, the things that he wants to talk about here, pontificating about, you know, the beauty of nature, talking about God, all of those things? Again, it's these strange tangents that is going on, difficult to understand.
It's the sociopathy. It's the same one as I've seen from prior people, just like Bryan Kohberger. That's why I brought up the BTK killer. It's just the attention seeking. He thinks he's more interesting than he actually is, but clearly there's something wrong. Any normal human being, if we put ourselves in the frame of mind of a normal human being, right? A normal human being, if they cut their hand and they bleed, they panic, they get a Band-Aid, they put Neosporin, and this is like a traumatic event for a few hours, right? If they ever accidentally do it to another human being, they're panicked for weeks, right? Bryan Kohberger did this to 4 innocent people, viciously stabbed them, killed them, right? He didn't press a button and cause their death. He did something that is the most grotesque thing that you could do. So this is a person who's not only well-adjusted, he missed a turn at the proper developmental stage with his brain growing up, where it just made him this way. Some developmental turn in his brain synapse happened, fired the wrong way, where he's not only not a normal person, he's a sociopath and a killer. And so he wants the attention. He wants people to give him the acclaim. It's the same avatar as any other person just like him. It's disgusting. It's sad. I feel bad for these families. I actually know what they're facing. I actually know what they're dealing with. So that's what I see.
Marie, let me ask you, there was speculation early on if maybe he did this or somebody else was involved with him when he did it. When you hear some of the details, one of the things that I'm struck with is, the number of stab wounds that went into each of these killings. That takes time. It takes time to stab someone 30-odd times, 50-odd times. There was a sense there was some strangulation involved. There was a second weapon involved to one of the victims. I believe I read Kaylee Gonzalez may have been killed with some other weapon or may have wounds from a different weapon. Do you get any sense from reading this stuff and getting a sense of what's going on in that house that maybe there was more than one person here, or was he capable of doing all this on his own?
I think he was capable of doing all of this on his own because his victims were home where they expected to be safe. And he ambushed them. They were not expecting it. And all of them had just come from a party, so they had alcohol in them, which reduces your awareness, your physical strength, your common sense. So all of that, they were just little girls. And he was a man, so size-wise, with the weapon, he was able to do that. He was able to strangle, stab them over 30 to 50 times, slash their jugular veins, their carotid arteries, lacerate their livers, because he's a big guy against a bunch of beautiful, young, smart, petite, innocent little girls. And then the young man he murdered, he stabbed him in the clavicle. Mind you, everything is around the neck. He basically slit everybody's throat and then did them in. He could have done it by himself, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that aspect of it really leads me to believe that probably was the case, Mike, because I think as you go into thinking about the meticulous planning that went into this crime, I don't think it's a coincidence that he chose a night that he knew perhaps they'd be out drinking late, and that it might affect their ability to respond to what he was going to be trying to do.
Absolutely.
I didn't think about that until you just said it, but yeah, that actually makes it even more gross. And so he stalked them. He prepared. He planned, and so that's all in line with everything that happened and with his personality. And so it's very disgusting. He held a place of trust in that community with his position at the university. Him being a part-time teacher. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the worst thing. Every single parent out there has a kid in college, either now or in the past or in the future, right? And so how do you prevent something like this? You really can't. How do you, you can't. It's just the luck of the draw. These families were just unlucky, right? My older brother was just unlucky. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyone who's had a family member murdered by a sociopath, it's just the luck of the draw. It's just pure, dumb, blind, bad luck.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Anne-Marie, I got to say, is there any thoughts at all in your mind or question that had he not been caught this time, that he probably would have done this again?
Of course he would have, because this was unprovoked. I'm telling you, he was hating on those girls because they were fly and he could never get into that circle. And in that college community, there's a bunch of fly, innocent, smart girls who would not give him the time of day. That's why he chose them, because he was hating on them. They were everything he couldn't be because he's a loser, a cornball. That's what he was and still is.
Yeah, Mike, I co-sign that. I hear you. And I agree with you guys because we found out that he was on Tinder. So clearly he wanted that aspect of his life. That's something that he wanted. Sometimes some people are more focused on other things, but clearly that's something he wanted. Mike, real quick, I got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's exactly. See, I co-sign what Marie said. That's exactly what it is. That's the avatar. He wanted the attention. He didn't get the attention. Had he gotten the attention, he would have murdered more people. He might have murdered the person in a relationship with him. Exact BTK killer profile. This is what Bryan Kohberger is.
All right, guys, stand by. That's going to do it actually right now for our coverage of the Idaho student murders case.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.